Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, I'm excited to have Kevin with me here today. He hails from a land distant from my own, so his accent is slightly different than mine, and I absolutely love that. So how you doing, Kevin?
Man, I'm terrific, John. What's going on?
Yeah, so you're coming at us from Texas, is that right?
Yes, sir. Nice and warm down here.
I bet it is. So there's a lot of stereotypes that we Canadians kind of have around Texas. And ironically, like the province that I live in, Alberta, we sometimes call it the Texas of the North because we know cowboy hats and trucks and beef farming and oil and that sort of thing. So there is some crossover, but we do get a pretty nasty winter. So, what are some stereotypes of Texas that you find to be true?
Well, it's huge. And, everybody that's from Texas is a really big fan of Texas, and just ask them about it and they'll tell you all about it. But it's pretty wild, man. It's kind of like a country to itself because, you can drive 10 hours and you're still in Texas. And I lived in Chicago and you drive 10 hours and you're like 4 or 5 states away. And so,
right.
Texas is a little sovereign nation, but that's its own opinion, right?
Right. I mean, it often gets called like the Lone Star State, and I believe at some point in time in its history, it was a sovereign nation, was it not, or did it try to be?
Yeah, I think it was, and then it wasn't, and like I didn't realize that every state doesn't have years and years of Texas history in school, because I'm from Texas, and of course everybody knows all about Texas. Why wouldn't they? But my knowledge did not last into adulthood very well on Texas history, unfortunately.
Well, I believe one of the slogans is "Everything is bigger in Texas," and I would say the Texas truck market is bigger than the entire Canadian truck market. So,
yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I mean, and I live in Dallas, so everything's pretty huge here and spread out. It's like everything's a 30-minute drive. It doesn't matter. It's a 30-minute drive.
Right, because you have the space to expand in that kind of way, and so. I think Texas, you must be like the second or third most populous state behind California.
Yeah, I believe so. And I mean, we have 4 of like the top 15 biggest cities with Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and Houston. So there's a lot of folks here and more coming. So
yeah,
secret's out.
Yeah. So what is bringing people to Texas?
Well, for one, I think it's because we have no state income tax, which, I lived in Chicago, like I said, for a couple of years, and I don't like paying taxes twice. I don't really like paying them once, but I understand the purpose, right? But, the state income tax, if you could do without it, why wouldn't you? But, you pay a little bit more in property taxes. I think a lot of people left different places for political reasons, too, during the past couple of years with, big shifts and, perspectives or whatever, so.
Yeah. I mean, there's like some seriously hot button stuff that's like happening south of the border. I gotta say, like the U.S. is it's fascinating that it's held together for this long in one sense, because you think about it, like each state in a sense is like a little mini country of its own. Like some are obviously fairly small, but the fact that you've held together for this long with this many sort of diverse opinions and political ideologies and whatnot is actually surprising and impressive.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing really recently. Actually, I was like reading about Rome, and I'm like, what happened to Rome? If they had all this going on, what happened? And just like kind of looking to see if there's any echoes, kind of currently with what we got going on. And I guess you kind of confirmation bias, you get what you're looking for, right? So I kind of quit going down that rabbit hole because I was already getting nervous about things. But you know what, man, America's great. I'm really grateful that this is where I get to live. But we get to have so many different freedoms, and freedom of thought is one of the coolest things we can have, and the ability to express it.
Now that I mean that's an interesting one. This idea of freedom of thought, because freedom of thought and freedom of expression are not necessarily the same thing. I'm pretty certain that if I was to express certain views in the online realm, that I would find myself facing some kind of vitriol from one side or the other of the political spectrum, and actually potentially risk some contracts that I have, for example. So this is a bit of a distraction. We're gonna tell your story, but I also this is kind of a bit fun too, right? Just to go back and forth a bit. But the idea that if I was to express an opinion that goes against some kind of one side's narrative, that I might be on the receiving end of maybe kind of like, I don't want to say a hit job, but definitely I might suffer the economic consequences. So I wonder how many people actually censor what they really truly think in the online space, because they're afraid of the consequences or ramifications of expressing themselves freely online.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine. I'm definitely not immune from that, because it's like if it's taken out of context, it could be so
Yes.
dangerous. Or I've said so many times, like I'm so grateful there wasn't social media when I was a kid, or
Yeah.
recordings of things that had happened. Like we all make mistakes, but I don't need it living for the forever like things do
Right.
now. It's pretty scary.
Like I was a dummy growing up, and like it was just because literally I didn't know any better, and we didn't have the internet, and so we're just left with whatever sort of we know from our, I mean, I could read encyclopedias, not that I did that for fun, but like that was, I remember we had like World Book Encyclopedia, and that was where we got our information from. If I was doing research for a report, I was going to the World Book Encyclopedia, not going to the internet. And so the things that we would say and do back then were just really rooted in ignorance, not malicious ignorance, but just simply ignorance and a total lack of knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, it was so dangerous. Like I grew up in the 80s, and like there weren't really rules, like
Yeah.
you didn't have to wear a seatbelt. I remember riding on the armrest in my dad's car while, like there's an open container of alcohol probably. Like, I mean, I wasn't drinking it, but like it was like, frowned upon maybe, but you got like 8 kids in the back of a pickup truck. Like, whatever, it's all good. It's the 80s.
Honk if a kid falls out. Like, yeah.
Yeah. We'll swing back. We'll get him on the way back. It's just a head wound, concussions aren't dangerous in the 80s.
Oh man. Yeah. I think every generation looks back and says like this next generation's soft or something like that. So, well, thinking about your story and kind of growing up and whatnot, because you went through a really difficult period of time in your life, but I like to kind of lay the groundwork for how we got to that place. You grew up in Texas, as you mentioned, in the 80s. What kind of sticks out for you? And did any of your experiences in your younger years, like growing up, kind of shape the difficulties that you fell into?
Yeah, my parents got divorced when I was really young, like 2 or 3, I think. And my mom remarried fairly quickly, and my stepdad's great. He's still great. I have a great relationship with him. My dad was present. He just didn't live in my house, and that at the time it didn't bother me, right? I thought, but it's hard, like not having your dad around or whatever, or just being different, because there was still like a stigma around divorce back then. I was like, I remember it was like hard. I was like shame when I would tell my friends, right? Like, oh, my dad lives in this other place. And I'm like, why? And like, I don't know, like I had anything to do with it, right? But
yeah.
But
my mom and dad didn't like each other enough to keep going together.
Yeah, or maybe they liked each other enough not to. I don't know. And they were really, copacetic, I think, to support us, my brother and I. But my stepdad being a preacher, they get like transferred a lot. There's a lot of politics in church. Oh my gosh, like it's it's so much drama. And every few years he would get moved, and so like I'd move a lot, and I kept like being the new guy. And I remember being like really outgoing when I was younger, and then as I started going towards like middle school and stuff like that, I started really caring about what other people thought, and things started getting like harder then. And like I don't know why I cared so much, but like I didn't really understand or own that frankly it's none of my business what other people think, and it matters very little. But that was really kind of the beginning of getting sideways. Just really creating this identity of gosh, really needing other people to see me a certain way to be okay.
That's a great way of phrasing it. Needing people to see you a certain way in order for you to be okay with yourself. And I'm pretty sure we could say that almost everybody goes through some kind of experience like that in this developmental phase in life. But some people, as they go through it leads them down sort of a slippery slope. And where did that take you?
Yeah, well, I played sports. Man, until I was about 15. I was really into baseball and football and all the other stuff. And I actually started playing hockey when I was 18 because we didn't have hockey here until I was 18. And that's how we always knew the Canadians. You guys were the ones who were really good and always really nice too, man. The best attitudes and the best skaters. And I remember asking one of my friends, Andrew, I'm like, dude, why aren't you a pro? He's like, I'm just average in Canada. And, with his great accent, I was like, what are you doing down here, dude? He's like, I came for college. And like, he played baseball at one of the schools down here and just really, really good guy. But, when sports were great, man, kept me out of trouble, had a ton of energy as a kid and like I still do as an adult, which is awesome. Right. But if it's not directed towards positive things, it's gonna, manifest in some other way. And when I kind of got away from baseball and I got away from like the good crowd, if you will, and like I was hanging out with some guys that were probably good guys, but maybe they didn't have even some of the advantages I had growing up. And so there wasn't a lot of strong male role models in their lives. And I had a lot of freedom, which maybe wasn't that good of a thing for me. And so I started getting a little sideways. I'd been like such a good straight arrow until like that age. And there was a huge left turn, like kind of my sophomore year in high school where I really didn't like myself a whole lot and it really hurt, but I didn't have the ability to look inside and, deal with that. And so instead of, I don't want to hurt. Nobody wants to hurt, right? It's natural to move away from pain. And especially being a man, right? You can't say, hey, this hurts and I need help, right?
Right. Yeah.
I just didn't have the ability to say, I don't know, or I need help. Right. It took me like 30 years, literally, to learn how to say that. And, I found, like if I drank alcohol, like it was awesome because if I can't feel pain, then I can't hurt. Right. And so I would avoid a lot with that. And, like just bad things obviously follow that.
Yeah. So you kind of started and it was in the sophomore year because the legal drinking age in the U.S. is 21, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. They changed that in the 80s from 18 back in the good old days when there was no rules, right? They moved it up to 21. So,
yeah, which I think is not a bad idea from a neurological developmental standpoint. It's 18 here where I live, and you can get your learner's license at 14.
Wow.
You can't get your full driver's till 16. But anyways, but I think about how even alcohol is marketed and how it's sold to us and what we're told it is and what it represents and so on. And I think the reality is often very different than what is sold to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like this good time and the party never ends when you're drinking. And, there's like beautiful women and like they had Spuds McKenzie back then, like they have this fun dog you get to hang out with and like there's no problems for anybody. And, one of the dangerous things for me was like I could consume like a massive amount of alcohol for whatever reason and not really get hangovers or really any ill effects aside from, the terribleness, that like drunkenness brings, while you're in it. But, the next day it was like nothing had happened except for the repercussive benefits, the people I pissed off or hurt or whatever. But, physically it didn't hurt me. And I think that was really dangerous because I would, prove how tough I was by drinking, X amount or whatever.
So did you take on a certain personality when you were partying?
Yeah, and you never knew what you were gonna get, man, because it could be like a really fun, like guy that like talk to everybody, have a great time, best homeboy. But then it was like if I went too far, it would just get really dark, and I would get really just like violent with myself almost, and violent just with whatever's around me, whether it was people or a wall or whatever. And like I was just abusive because I was in like I didn't understand, but I was in so much pain, and I was just trying to keep it all in, and you just can't keep stuffing stuff down like that. It's going to manifest in some way. And when you're literally out of your mind when you're on alcohol, because the big problem with alcohol, it's like you have this massive ego, or it's any addiction, right? Like gambling, food, alcohol, sex, whatever your thing is, right? It's just the symptom of the problem. The problem was a huge ego with no self-esteem. And so, it's like, hey, look at me, but don't look too close because I really hate myself. And, I hate everything that's going on here. And, I just like Anthony Kiedis, from the Red Hot Chili Peppers has a great book on addiction, scar tissue. And I mean, it's really his life story. It's not just about addiction, but he had problems with heroin. And he's like, he described as like, you're this big piece of poo that the world revolves around. And, he used a different word there, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I can put two and two together. Yeah. That's man, and this just like some remarkable insight. And I know probably a lot of this is gleaned kind of from hindsight and looking back and the work you've done to sort of get out of that place. But you look back and, I often wonder like what might you have said to younger you if you go back to, I don't know, maybe in your early 20s, for example. Were you going to college at that time?
Yeah, I was a professional student for many, many years. I think I went to college all in for like 9 years. I did graduate, but I'm not a doctor or a lawyer, even though I went to school long enough to be maybe both. But I just really I wouldn't do anything that was hard. As soon as things were like there was any kind of resistance, I would just quit. Right. And school had
Mm.
always been really easy for me. But I just didn't care about anything. I actually ended up graduating, like, the summer after graduation because my senior year, we had to do this research like, I took senior English my junior year because I tested out of it early, and we had to do these 50 note cards for our senior paper. I was like, "I'm not doing 50 note cards. That's stupid," and I refused to do it. Like, "They won't fail me." They failed me. And then so my senior year, I'm like, "They won't fail me twice on the same thing," and they did. So I had to, like, go to summer school. My friends were like, "Why aren't you at graduation?" Like, "Ah, graduation's stupid," you know? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just such a flawed way of thinking. It was just a massive amount of arrogance and very, very dangerous.
You've brought up the term ego and arrogance, and maybe I think all of us kind of have a picture in our mind of maybe what that represents. But I'd be curious to know how you might describe it.
Sure. The ego is just this false self that we generate, right? That says, "Hey, you know what? I'm separate from you. I'm separate from like all of life on this planet. I'm separate from God. There's me and there's everything else." And that's what the ego is all about because it's not that the ego is necessarily malicious, but we start out like from the truth, right? We're born out of infinite love and infinite intelligence, and kids are really happy because they just came from source, right? The truth.
Hmm.
And then, hey, you're special. This is yours. This is mine. And there's this separation created. And we've naturally formed this ego. And the ego is like kind of there to, protect us. And the one thing the ego has to have to survive is conflict. And, it's like, hey, you're different. They're different. Like, you're right. They're wrong. And that was like the big thing. It was so much about just being right. And like, well, wearing right is a badge of honor. And like, I don't know about you, but I don't walk away from people like, man, John was awesome. He was right about everything. It made me
Yeah.
feel like totally wrong and terrible about myself. Like, no, man.
Yeah.
And like, who cares? Like the ability to say, I don't know and mean it. But I tried to be good at everything. And I was, average at best because if you're trying to be good at everything, you're going to pander to the middle. And,
Right.
if I want to be above average, I got to treat myself above average. And, we're created in excellence, but a specific kind. And,
Yeah.
like I found myself, living somebody else's version of life.
Mm-hmm. So 9 years of going to school, we're doing multiple degrees, or did it take you 9 years to get one? Or
Yeah, it was my bachelor's. So yeah, I would like go, then I would like not go and just like not drop classes. So then I got like probation once, I got suspended once, and finally when I eventually got sober when I was in my late 20s, I went back to school. And I'm like, that was easy to finish. Like I should have quit drinking a long time ago, and it
yeah,
was it was incredibly motivating too when you're paying for it yourself, because my dad paid for it for a long time for me, and he was incredibly patient and kind. And my dad had graduated in 3 years with an accounting degree when he went to college. And I'm like, hey,
right.
anybody can do that back in the day. It's harder now, like,
Yeah,
especially when
yeah,
we don't go to class.
yeah. So and it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I'm thinking like as you're going through these years, sort of developmental years, in your 20s still, and I say developmental years because really our brain doesn't reach full maturity until in our late 20s, which we often kind of forget. Um, but what was it like? Like, were your parents, either your parents, aware that this is something that you're wrestling with and that it was going in a not very good direction?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point on the development too. One of the things about addiction, it's like whenever you start practicing your addiction is kind of when your development stops too. You stop kind of your maturity at that age. And so, basically I was in this like 20 something year old man's body with a 15-year-old intellect running around, and it was, incredibly hard. And looking back, I actually bartended for the first couple of years I was sober, because I was finishing college, and I remember seeing like people who had struggles with alcohol, and I would listen to them talk, and I would listen, especially like men talking to women. They were like, some guy in his 50s, and like the things he would say, I'm like, man, I wouldn't have said that, at 15. And it's like because he had probably started practicing his addiction around that time, and he hadn't matured, and so like he was literally a child in the man body. And, of course,
Mm,
like your parents, they can see it, right? Like, they're closer to you than anybody else. And my mom, super kind, just a really great woman, lots of empathy. I think her and my dad were both just afraid to really push too much because I was pretty volatile and not like aggressive or abusive or anything like that towards them, but like, hey, F you, I'll just go away and you can't tell me what to do. Like you want me
Right.
here like this or you don't want me at all. And so, and like
Mm.
just it's hard to have a conversation with somebody who refuses to, connect or and join in a conversation. And that
Right.
was like part of the arrogance. And it was like, it was so just about me. And like, except when I didn't want it to be about me. Right. And I'm like,
Right. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was your problem that you couldn't deal with me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. And I wonder, have you had conversations with your parents later when you sort of look back in hindsight and just sort of expressing appreciation for them kind of sticking with you while you were going through this really difficult phase?
Yeah, of course, like made amends and like, hey, sorry about that. And,
Yes.
like that being, kind of 15 years of crap I put you through. But man, moms are the best, right? Wouldn't be here without them. And my mom's
Yeah.
like, hey, my mom like extreme ownership, right? She's like, well, I can't help but think that's, partially my fault. I'm like, no, like you
Yeah.
were great. You were great. Like, you're great. I love you. Thank you. Like always there if I needed you. Didn't give up on me. And, fortunately, my dad passed away a few years before I got sober, so I didn't get to see the best version of me. But
Mm.
I know, man, he was so humble and so kind and so patient, and he was just like just a badass human. He like every day that went by, he became a better version of him, and he was just a kind and gentle like guy and huge heart and just cool dude. And really grateful that I had parents like that to support me.
Yeah. That's quite something to hear. Just thinking about that, like, and did you ever like stay with either of your parents in any of this time, like in terms of living with them?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't responsible enough most of the time. Like, I had my own place, but I'd be like, "Hey, Dad," like every month, "I'm a little short on rent." He'd be like, "How short?" And like the whole amount. And it's like, "All right, cool," And he was incredibly graceful for never, cutting me off. And he I had actually passed away about a year before I got sober, I guess, and he left me some money, and now I have like, quote unquote unlimited funds and an addiction, and like that's the only thing worse than an addiction is an addiction with a bankroll. And
Mm.
then I felt like all this like guilt and shame for like just not being there for him or whatever, like not that he would ever felt any of that, towards me, but so I started punishing myself even more because I didn't have the capacity to like deal with, the trauma or the stress or the whatever. And I
Mm.
definitely
Mm.
didn't have the maturity to like, hey, I need help. Right. Cause like, no, I'm the baddest guy around. Like I can do everything. And, obviously that was a false narrative, but,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and when you say punish yourself, how did that manifest?
man, well, lots of alcohol, right? I would get, super intoxicated. I would go out and, kind of like vigilante justice. If I saw somebody who I didn't perceive as acting right, I'd like pick a fight, but like I'd usually do it with somebody who's bigger than me or, groups of people. Because for some reason I don't know what I thought I was. I definitely wasn't, this prolific fighter or anything like that, but I acted like I was. And I got really good at like headbutting people's fist, I think, getting punched in the face probably. And I was just really destructive on my property. Like I drove my truck off a bridge when I was like 18 and got a really bad car wreck and I was underwater for a couple minutes and police officer saved me, like dove in, like pulled me on my roof and like didn't even slow me down. I was like, yeah, whatever, man. It's cool.
That is crazy, man.
It was,
That's part of your story I wasn't aware of, like driving off a bridge and
yeah,
ending up in water and getting pulled out.
yeah.
Did, so then I'm curious, did you ever meet that police officer again?
Man, unfortunately, he had a really tragic end too. He got into an accident when he didn't have his sirens on and hit a car with a couple of college girls in it. And then he took his own life because he couldn't deal with that. And so that's pretty tragic for, a hero like that to have just a really bad situation happen to him. And so I just like, pray for him and pray for his family and just really grateful that, people like that exist. I mean, that's pretty selfless stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And I, not to get too sidetracked, but I just think about, I guess in that sense, thinking the world would be a better place without him, or, and that sort of action, but it can't, that action can't undo like what took place. And there's just something, I had an interesting conversation, really beautiful conversation with a lady. Her name is Sarah Payton, and she does something called resonant healing. And I really what it deals with is like we were talking about transgenerational trauma, and that is this like the trauma that passes on from like one generation to like it actually skips a generation. And she had an explanation for it that I'm going to totally butcher,
Yeah.
but it's something like, so the eggs that your mom had that led to you were being formed when she was in her mother's womb. You know, because when a girl is born, all the eggs she's ever going to have are already there in her ovaries. Like they don't make more after birth.
Oh, wow.
So you go, whoa. So the eggs that hold the genetic material that led to you being you were formed when your mom was in her mom's womb. And I was like, whoa. That's
Right. That's pretty
like,
deep, man.
wow. And so then there's you know, every DNA double helix has like a protein sheath around it, and there's elements of epigenetics. You know that epigenetics are like the software programming. You know, genetics are the hardware, and epigenetics are like the things get switched on and off. And so, depending on the conditions your grandmother lived through, determine in one sense what the starting template is, and then you take that trauma and so on. So it was really quite. I was like,
Wow.
whoa, this is
Yeah.
something to think about. And I guess we were just talking about this. So how do we get through like this hard stuff? And this is something you've worked a lot to get through as well. And it's like there isn't kind of a way around it, but you know you get stuck is how she kind of described it. I think
Yeah.
this is what I'm hearing you describe as well. You get stuck in this pattern kind of playing out on repeat, and I think that's probably what it felt like for you.
Oh my God. Yeah. It was like that movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray,
Mm.
except for it wasn't fun at all. Like he got to do all these cool things, like learn how to play the piano and do ice sculptures, and like none of that for me. Fortunately, I didn't hurt anybody, or,
Mm,
hurt
mm.
myself, of course, but, that didn't do any permanent damage. And like, I'm really, really grateful for that. And, it was so frustrating because like, no matter what I tried, like everything seemed to fail. And it was simply that I was trying to create from, misguided information. And like, I was trying to create from the ego, and the ego is all fear based. Like
Mm.
everything we've ever done came from one of two motivators. It was either love or fear.
Yeah.
And, fear wears lots of hats, right? Anger, guilt, shame, remorse, apathy, pride, whatever. It's all fear based. And like, if I'm trying to drive to see, Coach John in Canada, but I have a map that takes me to, Mexico, I'm going to end up in the wrong place because that's,
Yeah.
starting with flawed information. And the same thing with the ego, man. It's starting from fear. And if I'm coming from fear, it just creates forceful behavior where you try to force people to do what you want, force yourself to be a certain way. And that's control. And autonomy is one of our most, fundamental needs as humans, like the desire for freedom. It's like, you tell me
Mm.
what to do. That's the quickest way to get me not to do it. But, you can ask, right? And I'm happy to serve. And it was just all this fear-based, you know, small thinking. And, like I gotta like get this success and then I'll be okay. I'll get this girlfriend and then I'll be okay. And like none of that's going to make me okay. And it's such a flawed way to move through the world because if you can't give what you don't have, if you don't like have self-love, you can't
Mm.
have a loving relationship with another person because you don't have any love to give. And you're going to
Yeah.
lean so hard on that relationship. And what I kept finding myself doing was like I would validate my okayness by having a girlfriend, right? Okay,
Mhm,
well, if
mhm.
this person wants to be with me, then I must not be that effed up, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like I'm doing good. And then I would like
Right.
do like terrible things with them, like cheat on them or whatever. Like I never got physical or anything like that. Thank God, like that wasn't the thing. But like that's still like abuse, right? If you're like running around on people or just being
Mm-mm.
disingenuous and not honoring your word. And I had really kind people and nice women that I knew, and I was like just kind of the same to my friends. Like I wasn't like I would be such a good guy, and then alcohol would get involved, and just like total selfish, prick. And
Yeah. Yeah.
like and then I feel more guilty and like not want to think about that. And it was like get worse and worse and worse. And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, it's like addiction just gets stronger. It doesn't stay the same.
Yeah. So there came a point in time, like, I mean, and maybe it feels like you had more than one rock bottom. I remember one person describing it as he found rock bottom's basement.
Yeah.
So,
That's funny.
you know, but it's like, what was the point where you turned around and you knew? Because I imagine, maybe I'm wrong, but I imagine that maybe there's a couple times you tried to turn around but couldn't sustain it. Did that happen, or was there just one time where you're like, that's it?
No, man, was once called a stubborn learner, and my boss that called me that, I don't think he meant it in a good way. He's like, "Dude, you're a stubborn learner." I'm like, "Thank you." He's like, "That's not a compliment." And I really just like, you know what? It's my way, and I don't care. Like I could not be wrong, right? And to say that I had a problem would be me saying I was wrong. But I got like, there's like a saying in any kind of self-help addiction thing. It's like, it's just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And Like I knew that I was capable of more, and I was just so frustrated for just not contributing to the world, to my family. And my family, was like, oh my gosh, I went over to my mom's house on Christmas like I always did. My best friend was there. I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, you're never here at Christmas. And I'm like, and who's that guy that I don't recognize? And so it was a little coming to Jesus moment. They're like, hey, you're better than this. Like, you're capable of better than this, at least. And, here's what we want to see, or, you have to like figure something else out. And I was so freaking grateful for a solution that it was actually like a switch was flipped. I was like, cool, no problem. I was like, I'll do whatever you want. Like, I don't want this anymore. And like, they were like shocked because I was like this, like, 30, almost 30 years of just like totally doing it my way. And they were like, they had no idea how I was going to react. And like,
So this was an intervention.
Yeah. And, man, and thank God, man, that, my best friend, my brother, my mom, my stepdad, my uncle, like that they, love me enough to love past the a-holeness that I was bringing to the world on a regular basis. And like, hey, man, we want to help you. And,
that's so powerful. Like, cause it came from a place of compassion, not judgment.
Yeah. Yeah. Because man, I'm judging myself plenty. Like there was no need for them to pile on. I already knew, like, and it is wild, man. Like I went to a rehab for a couple of months, and I was like, man, what the hell, dude? I'm like almost 30 years old. I'm like in a bunk bed with other grown men, and I'm like looking around, and you have like a buddy when you get there. And my buddy was Jim. This guy was awesome. He was the funniest guy I think I've ever met. And I was like, dude, this is effed up, Jim. I was like, oh, these people have problems here, man. Like, what am I doing here? And I was like, this guy's been like 8 rehabs. This guy's over here like huffing gasoline in the shed. And I was like, I just like to drink a little bit. And he's like, yeah, Kevin, there's some sort of a mix up. None of us are supposed to be here, dude.
It's like in prison when they're like, I'm innocent.
Yeah. But and I so we would go to like AA meetings every day or most days, and he's like, you got to get a sponsor, and your sponsor is like your mentor, and he's like, go talk to that guy. And the guy he said is like this massive dude who rode up on a Harley. His name was Bear. Like that was his name, Bear. And he looked like a bear. And I'm like, I have no confidence at this time. I'm like totally like shattered. He's like, go talk to that dude to ask if he'll be your sponsor. I was like, dude, I'm afraid of that guy. He's like, that's why you got to go talk to him. And I did. And he looked at me like a long time. He's like, man, this is really good. I was like, what's really good? And he's like, man, I kind of had a little health issue. I need somebody to serve. He's like, so we'll meet next week, blah, blah, blah. And like, dude was awesome. He's like, man, don't make it a big deal. He's like, you either do or you don't, right? Just don't. I'm like, yeah, I don't. And honestly, man, quitting drinking was easier because I smoked too at the time. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to quit smoking because I don't want to quit drinking and die of lung cancer over it, right? Because I know I'll like go heavier on the cigarettes, right? Just to have something to do.
Yeah.
And so like quitting cigarettes was harder, and which is wild and says a lot about, the danger of cigarettes. But I quit both those at the same time. And like, dude, it's a cliche, but every day has gotten like markedly better, like amazing.
Yeah. So you have a sponsor and you meet with them. And did you have any relapses, or were you like straight and narrow? Like,
no, man, it's I've never even come close, honestly. Like like I said, I bartended for the first couple of years when I got sober, and it's like no problem, man. I was like, if I can bartend, I can do anything, right?
Okay, so you're like, I'm gonna throw myself into the fire and really test my resolve.
Yeah, I think the ego was still kicking a little strong, like when I first got sober. But man, like really, it was so clear. Like the moment I made the decision, like there wasn't an option. I was like, I don't drink anymore. Like period, I don't. And like I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? Like everybody drinks. Everybody I know drinks. So like, well, yeah, man, because drunks hang out with drunks, But it was, I mean, like it was God, man. God's pretty graceful, man, and he, he's like, cool. Been waiting patiently here for you to do it, your way as long as you want. Right. And when you're ready, I'll show you the way. And, I think it's so brilliant. I used to have a boss who, whenever we do what we did for people, I worked in financial services, and some people, would not continue on the plan or whatever. Like, Joe, why would they leave? He's like, hey, you know what? If Jesus Christ couldn't save them all, what makes you think you can? And I'm like, man, shut up, Joe. But you're so right. Like, and that's the same thing. It's like, he didn't force it on me. He was patiently waiting. And I'm like, hey, can you help?
Yeah.
And, it doesn't mean it's like sliding down rainbows while I'm petting a puppy on the way to work at the unicorn ranch every day, but man, it's a pretty sweet deal because you
Yeah.
get such a good look at the truth, like life is
Yeah.
really, really good.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. I kind of joke about when I work with people, and I call it the tunnel of sewage. And I say, people are, they come to me and looking for help, and I love it. I appreciate it. I love the opportunity to serve, and I know you use that word as well. I just love it. It really lights me up because I ran away from doing this for many, many years of my life, even though I kind of knew this is what I was supposed to do. I think I was really scared of actually doing what I'm capable of doing because there's something about our potential that scares us.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
but I would say to people, like, I think you have this idea that I'm riding up on my unicorn steed, and I got a second one with me. You're going to hop on this one. We're going to climb the rainbow bridge up to the clouds, and we're just going to coast above reality, going from cloud to cloud across the rainbow bridges, and come down the other side, and you're going to be a transformed person. And the reality is looks a little different. Right now, you're standing in front of a tunnel of waist deep sewage and some hip waders, and ready to start wading into the what. And it's kind of like I come along and I got a couple of kayaks. I go, looks like you're ready to go on this journey. So I got 2 kayaks. Would you like some company? And we're going to go kayaking through this tunnel of sewage, and it's going to stink, and it's going to be dark, and we don't know where the corners are. I got some headlamps, so I can shine a bit of a light on our present circumstances. And, I do know what's on the other side of this. And so if you're willing to kind of go through this, you're going to come out the other side a different person. And but it's like, if you're okay with that, that's when something really good is going to happen. And so I call it the tunnel of sewage.
That's really funny. And there's a book I was actually reading yesterday called The Warrior's Code by Roger Sparks. You ever heard of that?
I have, but I couldn't tell you much about it.
He's like he was a Marine Recon Special Forces back in, I think, the 80s, and he went to like the French Legion for like certain people qualified, only like 20 Marines, and they made him climb through a tunnel of sewage like Shawshank Redemption. It sounds like what you were just describing. And man, when I was listening to that, I was thinking about like how powerful he was as a teenager as opposed to what I was. But my life was fairly soft, and he grew up with like a biker dad and like a really different life, and just came out like this really dedicated, disciplined guy who is like a hero, and he's won the Silver Star. And I just think that that's really interesting because, like I had a lot of opportunities a lot of people don't have. And, that actually harmed me. But my brother had the same opportunities, and my brother's like been responsible since he was 1 day old. I'm like, how are you born wise and mature? Like he's just like middle-aged since he was a kid, and like, everything was so hard for me. It felt like, but self-imposed.
Yeah, but it's this, you wouldn't be here today doing what it is that you do had you not gone through those experiences. And because you've been through it, it gives you a type of empathy and understanding and compassion for people's circumstances that you wouldn't have by reading a book about this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, man, there was people that I met when, since I've been sober, I've had a lot of people, ask for help with their sobriety, and some people that just, they suffer from so many different things, like, depression and abuses in the past, like, physical, mental, whatever. And just such a big hole to climb out of. And I'm so grateful that, for the people that I had, and just the ability that, I didn't go too far the wrong way, and that, I'm able to, have that contrast of what I don't want. And like you said, they gave me a ton of sensitivity and empathy to other people, because I've seen the struggle. Like I wanted to do better. Like I just literally could not figure it out. I'm like, I feel like something's like fundamentally wrong with me. I was like, maybe I'm mentally challenged and nobody's ever told me. I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going on here, man, but something's not right.
Yeah. So, you got sober. You mentioned working like in a career in financial services, and I don't know if this was something maybe you were good at, but ultimately not passionate about, or.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, I was in that zone of excellence, but I definitely wasn't in the genius. But man, like, evolving past the ego is, a perpetual process. And, I was winning, so to speak. Like it was, financial services is sales, and so to speak. And, I was winning the trips, and I was getting to do all the speaking. I got promoted. I was a director of sales, and I got to train all the other people. And then all of a sudden, like, I just like started struggling. And like, I just realized I was like really grinding it out. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get a business coach. And I had a coach who was he was in the Secret Service for like almost 30 years, about 27 years. And he was awesome. Like I'd say things, he'd just look at me. I'm like, cause that's what he did, for hours, stand still and just look, right. And I was like, damn, you're intimidating. And like, tell him everything else. Right. And so he's like, dude, tell me what you love about your job. I was like, well, I love this and this. And he goes, dude, I don't even think you like your job. Like, what do you mean? He goes, dude, your tone changed, your body language changed. You sunk in your chair. You wouldn't look me in the eye. He goes, what do you actually like about your job? I'm like, well, I like helping people. And he's like, okay, well, everybody says that, they want to help people, but what do you mean like help? I was like, dude, I like helping people be more without making them feel like less. And so really, he's like, dude, long story short, he's like, you should be a coach. I'm like, well, how do you start being a coach? He's like, you tell people you're coaching. And I'm like, well, there's got to be more sophisticated than that. And so anyways, that was the beginning of the transition over into really, helping people in the business coaching capacity. And yeah.
Well, this guy, is he still around? This business coach you speak of?
Yeah. I sent him a message on LinkedIn a couple of months back.
Man,
every now
because he
and
sounds
then.
like an interesting person to love to chat to. 30 years in the Secret Service,
Yeah. I sent him a message, and like every now and then I'll send him one like, hey man, just thank you. Thanks for pushing.
Yeah. It's funny. I had a coach back in 2017 who changed my life, really. And he changed my life through compassion. And it's why it's the central tenet of the work that I do now as a coach myself, is that it's built on compassion, because for a long time I was, this hyper masculine, motorcycle, heavy metal, powerlifting, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And here but it wasn't getting me what I wanted. And he showed me compassion, and it blew my mind, because I in my mind I was convinced it wasn't going to work, and I tried to show him how it wasn't going to work and how he was going to fail. And I was determined to fail, and he wouldn't give up on me. And it's really, really cool story when I look back. And so every once in a while I just send him a message like, hey man, I just want to say thank you again.
Yeah.
Because I think it's nice to know that hey, you had this impact, and it continues to be a positive impact, and there's a ripple effect, because I get to do what I do because he did what he did.
Yeah, exact same thing. I'm like, man, just thanks for your patience. Thanks for, that's a great word, compassion. He wasn't just trying to be right. He was trying to help, and he's like, hey, man, he's like, man, well, however you show up, I'm gonna be here the same person. So he's like, just, because one time I was kind of a jerk, and because getting personal, right? Which is what coaching's about. But I got frustrated, and I was like, rawr, and I think I stormed out or something. And I came back the next week. I'm like, hey, I'm really sorry about that. And he's like, why are you still holding on to that? I'm not. I'm like, all right, that's a pretty good point. Man, it just really, really humble guy, and I knew he was like a total badass at the same time. And that, spoke a lot, because like I was like, well, I want to lift weights, and I could punch people out, and I don't punch anybody out, right? I was like, this faux tough guy, right? So
yeah. And so you got into the world of business coaching. And this is a really interesting thing, because I imagine there's a lot of people in this realm of business coaching. Yeah. And it's just like this generic sort of umbrella term, like, I'm going to help you do business better. What prompted you to do that? Was it kind of pairing your experience, having been in the industry you were in, and recognizing you had a knack for something like this, and maybe an eye for helping people? Because it's probably more than just dollars and cents and numbers and stuff.
Yeah, we can make money doing anything, right? If it was just about money, I would do things that paid me the most, and the money will come if you're doing what you love and what you're really talented at. When you can mix passion and purpose together, I think that's the pinnacle, right? Because passion is something I care about, I'm talented at, and then purpose is how I mix generosity into that, right? And so as soon as I got sober, I got super intentional about developing myself and just figuring out how I could be, the very best version of me, because the more I grew, the more I knew I'd be able to give whatever way I wanted to give. And I wasn't sure what I wanted that to look like, but, I started working with coaches because I wanted to, see what being more looked like. And that's when I realized that, I was really, really good at helping other people, see what, their version of amazing looked like. And it's such a beautiful thing to wake up working on purpose and doing a thing that you absolutely love and that helps other people. And, any kind of way, whether it's a, big, massive way or a little way, even if you're a stay-at-home dad or stay-at-home mom, you're still contributing in a massive, massive way, and it doesn't matter. There's, leadership's a behavior, right? It's not a position. I don't get to call myself a leader.
Right.
That's the people who, I lead, so to speak. They're the ones who, recognize me as a leader or not. Right.
I love that. Yeah.
And I think that's so true, because, true leaders are empowering, inspiring, right? Not telling people what to do. That's driver, that's manager. And And that word business coach, man, I'm even leery to use that, but
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it, right?
You're
Like,
right. It's like people say I should call myself a life coach, and I'm like, oh, I'm not
no,
sure if I want
I'm
to.
like, that's worse.
Yeah.
It's like, what did you find a guy on the corner that you gave 20? I have a certification. Like, okay,
Yeah.
cool, man. Like,
Yeah. I
what
got a
does
piece of
that
paper with
mean?
my name on it.
Yeah. Like when I bought a Seiko watch, like I got
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
name on it. And so, really kind of what I absolutely love doing is I really work with successful business owners and executives to help them align with their heart so they can maximize their happiness and really gain more access to creativity and aliveness. And so, they're creating like in these peak states with find and flow on demand, whether they're by themselves or with other people, and really just contributing to the world in the only the way they can, and just contributing these extremely high levels. And it's so beautiful because like the people who, around the world, like, Csikszentmihalyi wrote Flow, that book back in the day. Like the happiest people in the world are the ones who find flow the most because of the
Mm.
chemical cascade we get when we're in flow. And plus, we're like 500% more productive in flow. Like that's the internet stat, right? So it has to be true if it's on the internet. But,
Yeah.
but what a cool thing when you can, create that on demand and just create these like massive leaps forward on a regular basis in your life and in your business, and how you do anything's how you do everything. Your relationships get better. You have more freedom. You have,
Mm.
better performance. You probably have more money because of all of that. And, it's really beautiful when we do it through a leadership vein, which is, why I work with leaders, because I love to help people who are helping other people, be leaders, because when we're creating leaders of leaders, that's how we're creating a really positive, powerful impact in the world. And you know what? It sounds like maybe woo woo or whatever, but based in love. But you know what? Like, what's the alternative? Like, I love the love, man. And
Yeah.
it's not like romantic love, but unconditional love, which
Mm.
is what, my coach from the Secret Service that I was talking about had for me. It's like, I don't give a F how you show up, Kevin. I'm going to love you either way. Even if I don't like you, I'm still going to love you. Right.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
and that's unconditional love. That's why we have in-laws, right? To practice that.
Yeah.
That's just a joke. I love my in-laws. You guys are great. Uh,
Uh, yeah, and it's as we kind of wind up here, I think we use some language like contribute and give and things like that. And what does it look like to contribute and contribute in a bigger capacity?
Yeah, I think like really simple, man. I love simplicity's ultimate sophistication, right? Leonardo da Vinci said that, and
Mm.
he's a polymath, right? Brilliant guy in many disciplines. But it's like, hey, how can I, find something that I absolutely love doing that serves a purpose? And so the two questions that you always need to ask yourself, like, what do you want? Why do you want it? And man, so many people can't answer that. And if you ask yourself that, like, what do you want and why? And you can't answer it simply, then you don't understand it. Because if you can't explain something simply, you probably don't understand it very well. And so
Mm.
what am I passionate about doing? What am I passionate about creating? And why? How does that serve a purpose in the world? How do I mix generosity into that? And where I used to get tripped up is I used to try to pick the biggest purpose ever. Like, oh, I gotta pick this thing, like save the world, make a dent in the universe, like Steve Jobs. Like, no,
Yeah.
man, the inner purpose is to become the very best, most expressed version of me so that I can serve all the outer purposes that I have, the outer purpose of a husband, the outer purpose of a son, the outer purpose of a brother, friend, whatever. And so, that's the really cool thing is you got the market cornered on that. Nobody is ever going to beat you in the world at being you.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned it here, maybe I read it, something about like the influence equation, and just very briefly, what is that?
Sure. Yeah. This is like such a simple concept, but when it comes to, leadership, we can't give what we don't have, right? If I don't have knowledge, I can't give it to you. And so the influence equation, first, it works with you. It's trust, connection, vision. And so many people, myself included, when I was a younger leader, we start at the back of it, right? We start sharing the
Mm.
vision. We're like, hey, go get it. And people aren't connected to it. And if they don't trust you, they really don't care. And, they're not going to co-create with you for long, especially when you're not around. But when
Mm.
you start at the beginning and you really build trust with people, through authenticity is like the best way to build trust, showing up the way you say you're going to show up and being consistent, right? That leads to connection because, people are always asking those questions, right? Like, can you help me get what I want? That's kind of one of the internal questions everybody asks a leader,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And like, if I feel like what's important to me is important to you, that increases connection. And that's when I feel like, people share the vision as a leader, right? That they'll happily co-create with you when they feel connected to it and they really trust you. And that's when you co-elevate together. Because if you really create like, a championship performance, whether it's a little league team or a Fortune 500 company, you have to have people growing as individuals and you have to grow
Mm.
together as a team. And, I can't give any of that, like I said, if I don't have it myself. So I have to learn to trust myself and to, stay connected to, the truth of me, which is love, right? So that, I will co-create my own vision for my life. And then,
Mm.
that's when you can start inspiring and empowering other people to do the same. Because like, John, this as a coach, man, if inspiring and empowering, man, inspiring, stimulating to action, empowering, giving you the knowledge and the tools of what to do with the stimulation. Like that's the goal of any good coach.
Not just having a burst of motivation and running as hard as you can in one direction,
Yeah.
and then you find out that, well, shoot, this was the wrong direction, and I just waste all that energy and you burn out.
Yeah.
And I think you kind of have this idea that letting go is like the way to have more.
Yeah.
What do you mean by? Because I love this, because I think I'm a minimalist at heart, and I'm trying to convince my wife to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
we're all a work in progress. But
yeah.
man, there's a great book, David Hawkins, Letting Go: The Pathway to Surrender, which he definitely gets like technical and pragmatic on it, because like he's a PhD and an MD, so he's really good at explaining this. But basically, like perfection is attained when there's no more that we can take away, not no more that we can add.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, every time we let go, we instantly become more, because for one, we get peace as a reward always. And, like, what are you still holding on to? Like the things you're still thinking about, you're still holding on to. Like when I talked about my coach, when I came back the next week, he's like, you're still holding on to that.
Right. Right.
Like there's a great story of them, the two monks walking through the countryside, and one of them like saw a woman try to cross the stream, and he picked her up and carried her across. And they kept walking after that. He set her down and walked off. And the other monk caught up to him as a younger monk. And he goes, I can't believe you touched her, because you took a vow of like celibacy. And the older monk looked at him. He goes, I can't believe you're still carrying her with you. I left her back at the stream. And just like walked off. I'm like, man, that's really brilliant. And I think the key is to remember that if you're letting go of anything, there's always some forgiveness involved, right? Forgiveness of the judgment you made of yourself or the other person involved or whatever. But man, life is short, and let go and just, live in the flow.
I love that. And, maybe just to give some people, well, but before we get to the final bit of wisdom here, when we're going to try and condense all of your wisdom into a nugget here, but if people want to connect with you, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, just on Instagram, Kevin Kepple, my name, and shoot me a DM. Say, hey, I love connecting with great people. So
that's
happy
awesome
to say hi. Yeah,
and just this conversation feels like I'm chatting with an old friend. You've really, you're very, very humble for what you've attained and what you've got through. And maybe your foundational sort of life experiences have led you to being able to do this with a sense of humility, because you know what you've come from. Yeah. If I could put it that way, in all grace and kindness.
Yeah.
If you were to give people, hey, here's one thing I'd like you to take away from this conversation. If you could just give one sort of thing to people, what would you like them to take away from this?
Absolutely. And you just used a great word that I'm going to recycle here. And you said kind. And man, this right here, so simple. If you are intentional about being kind as opposed to right, your life will be amazingly better. Kindness is never, ever in, oversupply. And love being around people, like Coach John, man, you're a really kind, genuine guy, the real deal. And that's like, my wife will ask me, how was the interview? Like, man, really good guy, man, really kind, really nice, really humble. Like, that's the kind of guy I'm going to follow. That's the kind of guy I'll let pour into my life. But, if you're right, like, I can't resonate with perfection. I'm definitely far from perfect. And if you're right all the time, but just being really intentional about being kind as opposed to right, and really good things follow that.
I love that. That's so awesome, man. It's just been such a pleasure chatting with you. Like I said, it feels like I'm just chatting with an old friend, and I appreciate even your time today. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Coach John. Really appreciate you. And thanks everybody, check in with Coach John. He's doing really good things, man. Let him take you where you want to go.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.